to our viewer on our atomic adventures. Let's see what we're up to today. Who knows, we might have some fun and even a dance on the way.
Welcome to part 7 of the Life of Tom Ploy, and in this video we are covering years 42 to 49. And in this one, Tom has recently progressed to Whitechapel, a new hospital based in London, to see a new team of doctors.
This op was in fact a couple of weeks before his 42nd birthday, but it just made more sense to start it here. Anyway, back to the script.
Indeed. But this hospital was for a specific operation. We mentioned in the last video that there had been a positive experience when trying a TENS machine, even if every now and then you had the faint aroma of burning flesh due to arcing when the electrodes failed to make continuous contact with the skin.
Nice.
His CRPS was still causing problems, and most other treatments had a minimal effect. So, it was decided that having a more permanent intervention by having a neural stimulator implanted directly into the spine and against the spinal cord would be the way forward.
What could possibly go wrong?
Indeed. So dates were booked and preparations made for him to go in and have it fitted. On arriving and shown to his bed, a slight feeling like, okay, a massive feeling of trepidation hit him.
And when you hear people say that it was just a coincidence, you might differ from that conclusion. And this might not seem relevant outside of the UK, but a quick Google will reveal the circumstances for concern.
On the day of the op, Tom booked into Whitechapel Hospital, his surgeon Mr. Sutcliffe, and his named nurse was a Miss West. And the icing on the cake was when he found out he was in bed 13.
I bet he was apprehensive to say the least.
Yes, that would be a fair assumption. But the operation went well, pretty well for him anyway. And he even had a new experience that came with this op. We have to say that this was a planned event and not a mistake. He recalls he found the experience a little surreal, as 1 minute you're laying in the operating room ready to go under, and the next you're woken up in a seated position, leaning forward onto a support rail.
Oh, like that Christine Keeler photo from the Profumo scandal in the 60s.
Pretty much, as Tom was woken up in the op to make sure that the electrodes were in the correct position and we're going down the left leg. And of course, it wasn't as it was going down the right leg, to which the doc said, "Are you sure?"
He was.
But a bit of tweaking was needed, and it was soon in the correct position, and then he was soon back in the land of Nod, Tom's first memory post-surgery. Even he'll tell you that this was the most painful and uncomfortable op he'd ever had. And now Tom was in a worse condition than before. The operation site became unbearable to the touch, and the only way he was able to sit back was with a swimming ring supporting the area around it to prevent the implant site from touching anything. I was told they chiselled the outer part of the vertebrae, then inserted the electrodes inside the vertebrae and against the spinal cord. This piece of information becomes relevant for the care and treatments he experienced over the next 20 years. Within 18 hours of this op, Tom was discharged and he headed back home, and this journey turned out to be one never to be forgotten. This op did the complete opposite to the result they had hoped for, and unfortunately made a bad situation many times worse. As the pain in his back was excruciating, it soon became apparent that any contact directly or indirectly caused huge amounts of pain. And as the cocktail of opiates that he'd been injected with prior to release started to wear off, and it only got worse, he remembers that the friends who came with his wife and son formed a defensive wall around him. Think of an American football game where he was the quarterback and protected in his own pocket of defenders who surrounded him and defended him from anyone getting near him. Notwithstanding this, the rail and taxi journeys home were horrific, as even the slightest bump was felt. The closest thing you can imagine to how this experience felt would be the shucking of an oyster, when a broad knife is inserted in the back and twisted every time you move or get knocked. The first thing he did when he got home was be violently sick, then pass out. A week later was his birthday, and he was unable to even sit upright at the table. Even the donut-shaped blow-up ring was no help in the upright position, but did make it possible to sit in a slight reclining position. After a couple of weeks' rest to let things settle down when the machine was switched on, and it did make a difference.
Hooray!
Apart from the strange feeling when trying to walk.
Okay, thought it sounded too good to be true, so what was the concern?
It was the position of the electronics, including the battery pack.
Hold on, you never mentioned he was now the bionic man.
Absolutely not. It was where it had been positioned and attached to the abdomen muscle on the left side.
Sounds a good place tucked out of the way.
Yeah, it sounds good, but the box was just the right size where it would touch the lowest rib and the top of the hip bone at the same time. And any attempt to tilt the hip would result in it popping above and below the hip, then the rib bones.
Oh, like playing tiddlywinks, where you press one disc onto another to make it jump.
Plus it would also tug on the stitches where it was attached to the muscle.
He's always complaining.
Indeed, but might have a case too.
So what was the next step?
As it wasn't urgent, just annoying and uncomfortable, so understandably, he had to wait a couple of months before it could be recited. A second op was arranged and back he went. All went well with the op.
Thank goodness for that.
The op, yes, but the recovery had a couple of incidents.
Why am I not surprised? So what happened this time?
When he got back to the ward, everyone else was having their evening meals. As Tom woke up, he started to feel very unwell, and to everyone's delight, he started to be sick and projecting bright green vomit.
Nice.
Not for him or those trying to eat. He was moved away from the others and put on an intravenous drip of antibiotics.
That should do the trick.
You would hope, but after drifting in and out of sleep, Tom looked at his arm only to see a large lump the size of an orange.
Or apple.
Indeed, and it soon became obvious that the drip had missed the vein and gone into the surrounding muscle and tissue. So a second drip was set up and administered correctly, just in time to have him discharged.
Please tell me this did the trick.
Partly the position was much better and no longer popped when moving.
I can feel a butt coming.
Yes, the sensation when the implant was turned on felt different.
In what way?
The sensation was no longer constant, but would switch from being on to completely off, all dependent on which side the weight was placed.
So every time he transferred weight to his right side, he would get a shock, and on his left side, nothing.
You got it, so back to Whitechapel Hospital for a checkup with the technical team.
And they tweaked it?
Well, if I'm honest, no. When he explained the symptoms to them, he was taken aback by their answer.
Go on.
They just said, well, that can't happen.
Helpful.
So they tested their beliefs by taking control of the input system and did their own tests. And as Tom shifted his weight in his chair to a position where there was no sensation of the electric current, where he informed them they turned up the juice and again until it was on the highest setting with no effect. But as soon as he transferred weight to the other side, he got the full brunt of the device and would jump and yelp.
Their reply to that was?
That shouldn't happen.
Helpful. What was the next encounter like?
The same thing happened, and even with them seeing his reaction, and for the next 5 years, he would go back to new faces, but the same reaction of, well, that can't happen. And he showed them it did, but they just declined to believe it.
In the end, Tom just stopped going. And it wasn't until 20 years later until the truth surfaced. But that is for a future video.
As you can imagine, these constant setbacks played havoc with his well-being. And again, the help he got from Stanmore was his saving grace. But a break was needed, and a trip to get away from this nightmare was arranged. I'm not going to say it was an easy thing to do physically. Far from it, as he was in so much constant pain. So where he was made little difference. But mentally, it was a no-brainer.
So where did they go?
The decision was taken to return to a part of the world he'd loved, was North Africa, and this time to Tunisia. And what a decision that turned out to be. It certainly gave him a new hope, and on one of the quieter days he would get a pencil and paper and just started sketching to distract his mind from the pain. And it was here, he said, whatever I say when we get back home, make sure he went to some drawing lessons. And true to his word, he found an adult learning course which set him on the road to happier times. It started with some simple pencil sketching and progressed to watercolours, which was very enjoyable, but did limit the type of work to landscapes and trees and more trees. In the end, he had to make a difficult decision whether to stay with this friendly group of people you've met or go with a different direction, as he really wanted to go down the portrait route and in oils, which unfortunately the present classes didn't cover.
But you have to go where your heart is.
And as sad as it was to leave this group, he found out that if you choose wisely, most of these types of groups had other friendly, like-minded people.
And was he lucky to find people willing to share their knowledge, technique and passion for art? Often these included other students who used it as a way of rehabilitation.
One thing that became obvious was that the more you study the human figure, then an essential part of that would include life drawing.
And it's quite funny how quickly you get used to being around naked people.
I will try and add a few images at the end, but probably the more vanilla ones. One course he went on was a tester course where you could try several different forms of creative activities.
What sort of things?
a few familiar activities he'd previously enjoyed like photography and art, albeit the more modern forms which for him were not the way he wanted to go. One representation of modern art produced with high acclaim was 6 slices of bread and toasted to different levels of colour. He also had a glimpse into graphic design where a lot of mark making was done, and as informative as it was, the equivalent of a brass rubbing did nothing to raise his passion. In fact, the one that caught his interest, and the one he enjoyed the most, was ceramics. Included in this was the use of a potter's wheel.
He didn't...
Oh yes, he did. Never let an opportunity for fun pass you by. And in this case, it was emulating the iconic scene from the movie Ghost.
Not the...
Yes, he and Lottie took it in turns to be the recipient and provider of this particular scenario. Anyway, back to the script. Over these years in adult education, he became good friends with several of the other people and teachers on this part of his journey.
And it's to the detriment of the people who go to these and many other similar courses that politicians decided the things that help people's well-being and community in the whole should be cut due to the freedoms given to and the actions of these gamblers when their high-stakes games failed.
Banks?
You're welcome.
We don't mention his family life here very often, but it did fill his soul with an endless supply of rays of sunshine.
You're rambling again.
Sorry? Another strange event that would happen was if he went through a security in a shop where they scanned for stolen items. He often found that the induction loops used were at the same frequency as his remote control for the implant. There were times that on entering the shop it would suddenly switch the settings and you would get a sudden belt of electricity.
Which didn't look suspicious or funny.
A few other hobbies were added.
What sort of thing did he do? Cross-stitch?
Well, actually, yes, and a few dozen more. Anything to keep his mind occupied? Since he was a child, he'd always been fascinated with a certain object. When in town, he would often stop and look in a shop window, but at £30 was beyond his means or the generosity of his parent. But now the opportunity presented itself and he grabbed it. And finally, he got to play the saxophone. And it was even better than he'd hoped.
Oh, so that's why he plays that weird music. And what a shame YouTube wasn't around back then.
Indeed, these were the days of MySpace, which was more about the arts at that time.
Didn't he have a following in the thousands on there?
True, and it feels very strange nowadays, but back then you could chat with people in all walks of entertainment.
Like who?
TV stars, comedians, film directors, fellow artists, and of course models. But he found out that looking closer to home was where he would find his own muse for his paintings. And we must leave it there, but we will return to some of these in the next video. But before we go, if you would like to know more about CRPS, there is a link in the descriptions below to a clip by Professor Hanna. The Life of Tom Ploy is a foul attire production. And again, hold on to your hats as we pad out with a little music.
Underneath the willow trees where the cool winds play, I strum my guitar softly as the sun fades away. The river sings a melody, sweet as it flows. With every note I'm weaving a story that grows. So come and gather round, let the music be found. With the strum and the hum, hear the joy in the sound. Let that harmonica cry under the wide open sky. We'll dance to the rhythm as time passes by. And in the quiet moments when the night settles deep, the stars start to glisten as the world falls asleep. We'll hold on to this magic, forever we'll keep. With dreams that flow like rivers, in harmony we leap. And in the quiet moments when the night settles deep, the stars start to glisten as the world falls asleep. We'll hold on to this magic, forever we'll keep. With dreams that flow like rivers, in harmony we leap. Come and gather round, drum and the hum. Hear the joy in the sound. Let the harmonica cry. Under the wide open sky, we'll dance to the rhythm as time passes by. We'll dance to the rhythm as time passes by. My baby likes to keep me on my own. I hear your voice in my sleep at night. I like to think we had it all. If only you loved me the way I love you. You can get used to certain kind of sadness, but it's murder on the dance floor. Remember when you used to be a rascal? Where did you go? Up last love lane. You used to get in your nightdress, but those days have been labeled with love. So don't stop me now. I'm having a good time. I'm having a ball. If you want to have a good time, give me a call. I'm flying around in ecstasy, but it's murder on the dance floor. Remember when you used to be a rascal? Where did you go? Up last love lane. You used to get in your nightdress, but those days have been labeled with love.
And remember what his wife said, life's a bitch, and then you die.